Hello students and welcome to ePathshala. I am Prerna Trehan, Assistant Professor of Political Science at GGTSD College, Punjab University. In today's module, we shall be looking at the political thought of Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first Prime Minister and a leader of national struggle. We shall be first exploring the idea of democratic socialism. Next, we will look at how Nehru came to be associated with the ideas of democratic socialism and tried to adopt them and adapt them in context of India. Furthermore, we shall also be looking at him in context of him being looked as a radical socialist or as a conservative by Marxists. Lastly, we shall also be comparing his ideas with that of Gandhi's in the module. Democratic socialism is a political ideology that advocates political democracy alongside social ownership of means of production, often with an emphasis on democratic management of enterprises within a socialistic economic system. Jawaharlal Nehru was one of the main exponents of democratic socialism in India. He argued that democratic socialism could mitigate the evils of all third world countries. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was a great Indian democratic socialist. He was the harbinger of the socialistic trend in Indian national movement and indeed was instrumental in making India embark upon the path of socialism. However, he wanted to achieve the objectives of socialism gradually within the democratic framework. He thought socialism was the only panacea for all evils and ills prevalent in the Indian society. He brought to bear on the central problem his modern mind and scientific temper. Scientific socialism, tempered by his intense humanism, thus became his intellectual tool. He was a practical idealist. In a 1963 address to the All India Congress Committee, Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru stated, and I quote, "Political democracy has no meaning if it does not embrace economic democracy, and economic democracy is nothing but socialism." Building of a socialist thinker. Nehru became intensely interested in the philosophy of socialism from an early period in his life while studying law in London. He was vaguely attracted to the Fabians and socialistic ideas. However, in 1920, Nehru visited some of the villages in UP. It was this adventure which was a revelation to him. Until now, he was ignorant of village life and the dumb misery of the starving peasants who were clad in rags, hunger, and emancipation. After the Brussels Congress, Jawaharlal Nehru visited USSR alongside his father Motilal Nehru and sister Krishna Nehru. Motilal Nehru found it hard to understand the new Russia and collective idea of Soviet Union, but Jawaharlal was greatly impressed by the tremendous changes taking place over there. Nehru has recalled, and I quote, "My outlook was wider, and nationalism by itself seemed to me definitely a narrow and insufficient creed. Political freedom and independence were no doubt essential, but they were steps only in the right direction. Without social freedom and socialistic structure of society and the state, neither the country nor the individual could develop much." Nehru wanted the model of democratic socialism which suited Indian traditions and ethos. He was influenced by Fabian socialism of Britain and was of the opinion that parliamentary politics is the means of achieving socialism. Pluralism will become the ideological foundation of individual liberty, and societal demands must have a beautiful reconciliation. Socialists versus conservatives. The espousal of socialism as Congress goal was most difficult to achieve. Nehru was opposed in this by the right-wing congressmen Sardar Patel, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and Chakravarti Rajagopalachari. He had the support of left-wing congressmen like Maulana Azad and Subhash Chandra Bose. The trio combined to oust Dr. Prasad as Congress president in 1936. Nehru was elected in his place and held the presidency for 2 years till 1936 and then 37. Nehru was then succeeded by his socialist colleagues Bose in 38 and 39 and Azad in 40 to 46. After the fall of Bose from the mainstream of Indian politics due to his support of violence in driving British out of India, the power struggle between socialists and conservatives balanced out. However, Sardar Patel died in 1950, leaving Nehru as the sole remaining iconic national leader, and soon situation became such that Nehru was able to implement many of his basic policies without hindrance. The conservative right wing of the Congress would continue opposing the socialists until the Great Schism in 1969. Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, was able to fulfill her father's dream by the 42nd Amendment 1976 of the Indian Constitution, by which India officially became socialist and secular. Nehru's acceptance of political democracy was not unqualified, as he considered it means to achieve the end of social democracy. He saw clearly that if profound economic changes did not take place fast enough, the political structure would be rendered unstable. If political or social institutions stand in the way of such change, they have to be removed. Achieving the socialist state in India. Nehru saw the socialist society as some kind of cooperative society in which each individual would give his best and would find full scope for his own development. The very first step had to be ending of the profit motive of the acquisitive society to which we were accustomed. The dilemma he faced was the result of a desire to avoid a violent upheaval that would have disastrous consequences for future generations of a people, and to take the maximum of the people along with him on the new path. This was not an easy task, for the vested interests in the acquisitive society which he wanted to end were entrenched in the party and the administrative apparatus which necessarily had to be his major instruments. Also, it was these interests which were active during the freedom struggle, and even more during the years of freedom, they were able to create the illusion of democratic functioning, without active participation by the masses of a population who were to gain by the changes Nehru envisaged. It must be said that Jawaharlal Nehru fully realized the difficulties inherent in seeking radical change through democratic processes. In thinking of a form of socialism suited to our national needs and national genius, Nehru envisaged a limited place for the private sector. But he was quite clear about the framework. I quote, "I think it is possible to establish socialism by democratic means, provided, of course, that the full democratic process is available." End quote. Democratic socialism is a synthesis of democracy and socialism, the essence of both being equality. It is basic faith of democracy that however men differ in their individual talents and abilities, they are equal in their membership of a common society. No doubt, under this broader perspective, one can find the common ground, but in fact both democracy and socialism, as separate and independent systems, represent two different natures of equalities. Democracy always emphasizes political equality without taking into account equitable distribution of wealth and social justice. The emphasis of socialism, on the other hand, has been on economic equality without paying much attention towards political freedom and individual dignity. The insufficiencies of both are sought to be remedied under democratic socialism, where equality, in the words of the late Jawaharlal Nehru, means not merely equality of possessing a vote, but economic and social equality. Features of socialistic pattern of society. For the promotion of freedom, a socialistic pattern of society is indispensable. It should involve features like removal of poverty, reduction of inequalities of income and wealth, provision of equal opportunities to all, check on concentration of economic power, curbing monopolistic tendencies, democratic values, mixed economy, etc. Belief in parliamentary democracy. Nehru was a firm believer in parliamentary democracy. He had full faith on the ruling party and held the opposition. He believed in universal adult suffrage for the success of democracy. For the success of parliamentary democracy, he put emphasis on the rule of majority, methods of discussion, negotiation, persuasion, and so on. The press, judiciary, and public opinion would have a check on the legislators and be a guard in checking corruptions in parliamentary democracy. Peaceful solution to caste conflict. In a democratic socialistic setup, Nehru opined that the class conflict should be ended peacefully. He never believed in Marxian idea of class struggle or communist policy of ruthless suppression. In a democratic setup, due caution should be taken in putting an end to the class conflicts inside the society. Social development through planning. Another significant aspect of Nehru's model of economic development was the creation of consciousness of economic planning. Nehru thought it would bring all-round development of the society through planning. It would help in elimination of poverty and achieving social justice for the masses. By planning, he wanted to raise the national income and to spend them in productive channels for the improvement of the lot of the poor people of India. The first 5-year plan from 51 to 56, second 5-year plan from 56 to 61, and third 5-year plan from 61 to 66 galvanized Nehru's democratic socialism. Belief in democratic institutions. Nehru would not disregard the democratic processes or bypass the democratic institutions in order to put his ideas into practice. In the prevalent society with long history of feudalism, caste, hierarchies, religious divergences, multiplicity of languages and customs, in fact of stratification of society in a variety of ways, it was not easy to correlate tradition and change to work out a viable compromise between the best of the cherished values and the urgency of eliminating social and economic inequalities. Jawaharlal Nehru realized that revolution in our situation had to be voluntary and thus could not be imposed. He admired the Soviet achievements and accepted the ultimate ideals of Marxism, but was not ready to apply the same methods in India. He was clear in his mind that political democracy is the only way to the goal and is not the final objective. He saw that profound economic changes did not take place fast enough. The political structure would be rendered unstable. If political or social institutions stand in the way of such change, they have to be removed. Belief in cooperative society. Nehru saw the socialistic society as a cooperative society in which each individual would do his best to find full scope for his own development. The very first step had to be ending of profit motive for the acquisitive society to which we were accustomed. The dilemma he faced was the result of his desire to avoid a violent upheaval that could have disastrous consequences for future generations and to take place with him maximum number of people along with him on the new path. This was not an easy task, for the vested interests of the acquisitive society which he wanted to end were entrenched in the party and in the administrative apparatus. Once Nehru said that the contradictory and conflicting processes would not go side by side, and that unfortunately has been what has been happening in India. The directive principles contain a broad outline of the kind of socialistic society envisaged, but the many amendments to other chapters of Constitution that have been necessitated have brought out the dichotomy in thinking that has characterized the constitution-making body. On another plane, the formulation of the concept of mixed economy represented on one hand the halfway house Nehru thought of, and on the other the ability of the vested interests to keep two contradictory and conflicting processes going on side by side, a situation Nehru did not desire. It is no coincidence that the mixed economy in operation has resulted in strengthening of monopoly and big business houses and a consequent tightening of their hold on the administrative apparatus. If corruption has increased and public sector has not been enlarged and strengthened to the extent it should have been, this has been because of the acceptance of mixed economy or something of a halfway house. There has been a massive awakening as seen never before in our history, and despite massive illiteracy, our people have demonstrated their capacity to reject what is against their interest. But the real problem here is that the democratic process is not fully developed and people have only limited choice. In thinking of a form of socialism suited to our national needs, Nehru envisaged a limited place for the private sector. But he was quite clear about the framework. In all that counts in material sense, nationalism of the instruments of production and distribution seems to be inevitable. The question is whether there can be step-by-step approach in this matter. Our experience with the takeover of wholesale trade in food grains shows that partial measures in dealing with the production and distribution of essential commodities can defeat the very objective. The fate of the land reform measures has shown that administrative machinery is not geared to the task and can wreak havoc. The continuing importance and influence of the big business houses seems to be a direct result of the failure to involve people at the grassroots level more and more in the process of planning, production, and distribution. It is possible to find fault with Jawaharlal Nehru for not having made the maximum use of his popularity to force the pace of change, but to do so is to overlook the historical forces that had shaped him, as well as the circumstances in which he had to function, apart from his own commitment to the democratic processes as well as to the instrument at his disposal. Nehru's views regarding Indian Revolution. Nehru was conscious that the Indian Revolution would be long and arduous, for he said that leaders and individuals may come and go, they may get tired and slacken off, they may compromise and betray, but the exploited suffering masses must carry on the struggle, for their drill sergeant is hunger. Goals of Socialism and Theory of Two Instruments. It was his hope that the political parties and administrative apparatus would help masses assert themselves and secure their rights. He was quite clear in his mind that a leadership that failed to take masses nearer to the goal to socialism would be thrown aside, and mass upsurge in 1969 following the elimination of the syndicate from Congress would appear to bear this out, if only in a limited sense. The planning process, unfortunately, has not gone on the way that he had intended to, and this is where the two main instruments on which he had to depend come in. Rejection of coat and necktie mentality. Nehru wanted the services to cease to think of themselves as some select coterie apart from the rest of the people, and he rejected people with the coat and necktie mentality. He wanted a new type of administrator to emerge, one who could identify himself with the common people without effort and who would not become either a tool in the hands of the vested interests of a self-seeker without consciousness. However, this kind of change has not come about, and on the other hand, the expanded administrative structure has careerists and self-seekers in many key positions. This needs to change. Vision of making Congress a mass party. As for the other instrument, the Congress, it may now be in better shape than in Nehru's time, but what he said about the congressmen remains relevant. Congressmen should make the organization strong and effective. Use of money for boosting individuals in the organization is extremely undesirable. He wanted the party to be a mass party, constantly in touch with people and reflecting their aspirations, constantly struggling to end social and economic injustice. Some changes have taken place in the party in recent times, but it is still far from being the kind of instrument for change that Nehru wanted it to be. It is hoped that the new forces at work within the Congress and the mass consciousness that has developed in the country will make it so. Criticism. As a democratic socialist, Nehru was not ready to sacrifice democratic methods for speedy progress and was firmly committed to democratic socialism. According to Dr. Gopal, this was a flaw in the thinking of Nehru. Nehru felt that democracy and socialism were equal partners and could not be divorced. But Nehru, although a radical in European tradition, set out with confidence to work for this unprecedented, almost superhuman experiment of democratic socialism in a setting of Asian tradition and economic backwardness. Nehru always remained a socialist wedded to democratic practices. He made Indians aware of the value of parliament as an instrument of social change. As a leader of the majority party, he tried to act as far as possible on the basis of consensus. Communists, though, have criticized Nehru bitterly, including R.K. Dasgupta, H. Mukherjee, etc., for having failed to be the leader of true socialistic revolution. He, according to them, was torn between socialism and Gandhiism and sacrificed socialism in his devotion to democratic norms and the value of liberalism and individualism. Nehru laid primacy on democracy and freedom of the individual for the fear that a revolutionary equality might annihilate the individual. It is essential that assessment of Nehru's concept of socialism should be based on the fact that Nehru always wanted to achieve a socialist reconstruction of society by democratic means rather than by violent revolution. His conviction was that socialism without democracy would be tyranny in any and especially the Indian context. It is no doubt true that despite his massive personal popularity and power at his disposal in the government and in party, Jawaharlal Nehru could not put into practice many of the ideas he spelt out regarding radical changes, social and economic, that our society required. But this must be seen in the background of the dilemma that he faced as an honest politician committed to socialism on one hand and democracy on the other hand, as a radical socialist. Further, according to his estimate, radical solutions were impossible in the Indian situation. The super situation, fatalism, ignorance, and class distinctions were age-old features. In such a situation, socialism would be brought about by gradual, peaceful, and democratic means, by a steady conversion of the people and enlisting their support and participation. Though he was flexible about his tactics, Nehru was rigid about the goals. Nehru always considered democracy and socialism as a means to the end, not the end in itself. On equality, Nehru contended that liberty and democracy had no significance except in the context of equality. He realized that political liberty brought the vote but was of little use when society was riddled with poverty and economic inequality. Long back, Nehru stated, "What does it matter to one whether he can vote or not when he is hungry and starving?" The relevance of Jawaharlal Nehru remains undiminished today. In fact, his ideas and approach to political and economic social issues are more relevant now than his lifetime. It is fashion these days to say socialism is a vague term, that it is a slogan and there is no precise definition to what it means. This is essentially the argument of the believers in the status quo, of those who are afraid of radical change that will hurt their own interests or destroy their pet theories. In our context, with a long history of feudalism, caste hierarchy, multiplicity of languages and customs, etc., it has not been easy to correlate tradition and change and to work out a viable compromise between the best of the cherished values and urgency of eliminating social and economic inequalities. Nehru realized that revolution in our situation has to be by consent and not by imposition. The only way to maintain democracy and strengthen it is according to the solutions as per the demand of time and space. In this regard, the views and methodology of Jawaharlal Nehru can become more or less ideal for those who have concerns for challenges facing the Indian democracy. Nehru's preference for mixed economy seemed appropriate under the circumstances. To put it in his own words, "I am no believer in communist theory. There is much in it which accepts an economic theory, but basically I think it is out of date today, more especially in this atomic age. I think equally that the opposite theory is out of age in the context of modern world affairs." Lastly, it is important to see Nehru's deviation from Gandhi's idea. Though Nehru found Gandhi's conception of democracy something more than ordinary, stating that it is based on service and sacrifice, it uses moral pressure, Nehru's value system was different from that of Gandhi. He believed in science and technology and their application to industrial and agricultural development for bettering the social life. He reacted sharply against the medieval idea of trusteeship, which according to Gandhi was supposed to solve the problems of caste conflict. Furthermore, even on the issue of violence, Nehru believed in the democratic processes and could never tolerate insurrectionary violence as a means of construction of socialistic society. He recognized that force and coercion are necessary both for external defense and internal cohesion, and that governments are notoriously based on violence. In conclusion, we realize that Nehru tried to involve a level and idea of socialism that was more appropriate for the Indian conditions. He was inspired by the Soviet Revolution, yet he also realized that institutions of parliamentary democracy and liberal traditions were necessary for a holistic development of India. This amalgamation of liberal parliamentary traditions, along with the goals of economic equality and justice as promoted by socialism, are important even today. Today, as mass deprivation and poverty still prevails in India, the ideas of democratic socialism are needed to remove these social evils and ills from the society. Thank you.